Like many photographers, my first experience with lenses started with a zoom kit lens on my Sony 7 II, a lens that barely opened up to f3.5. But the more I got exposed to incredible photography both in books and online, the more I became fascinated by the dramatic look certain prime lenses could deliver. The blur, the separation, the feeling that your subject could almost exist on its own. So, of course, I picked up a 50mm. And then, everything changed. My photo walks in Manchester felt different. With f1.8, I could isolate a subject at a bit of compression and just enough drama to make a previously flat scene look interesting. For the first time, I actually felt like I was making a choice. I shot exclusively with a 50mm for 2 full years until it wasn't enough. Eventually, I wanted more compression, more separation, more drama. And that's when I picked up an 85mm lens, the Sony 85mm f1.8. I still remember my first photo walk with it. I raised the camera to my eye and suddenly everything felt closer, bigger, more compressed. I immediately dialed down the aperture to f1.8 and for the first time I actually saw the background separation I had been chasing for a while. One of my first shots with it, I remember it was a man standing at a bus stop. He was facing away from me and he was wearing a hat. Behind him there was a bus, huge in the frame. But with my aperture wide open, it was completely blurred. I pressed the shutter and I was hooked. That photo stayed with me for a long time. Not because it was technically perfect, I mean it wasn't, but because it showed me something that I hadn't fully grasped until this moment. It gave me to understand that a focal length isn't just a number. It's a way of seeing. And the difference between the 50mm and the 85mm is the distance between you and the world. And this distance is what this video is really about. When you switch from the 50mm to the 85, the first thing you notice isn't the bokeh. It's not the compression. It's the distance, where you're standing. With the 50mm you are closer, somewhere between 2 and 5 meters from your subject. Close enough to feel the energy of the scene, close enough to react, close enough that the people around you know that you are there. That proximity creates a kind of tension, a live wire between you and what you're photographing. The 85mm cuts that wire. To frame a subject similarly, you're now standing 4 to 8 meters back, and that extra distance changes everything. Not just the look of that image, but your entire relationship with the scene. You're no longer inside it, you're at the edge of it, waiting for the moment to arrive, or observing a single character passing through it. In street photography, this distinction matters enormously. The 50mm keeps you in the flow, it rewards intuition and quick movement, the kind of reactive, instinct-driven shooting photographers like Henri Cartier-Bresson made iconic. The 85mm asks for something different entirely. It asks for stillness, patience, the willingness to focus on aspects of a moment rather than the moment as a whole. Because distance doesn't just change the frame, it changes who you need to be to make the image work. And who you need to be is more simple than you think. I think the focal length you reach for most often says a lot about you as a person. Not in an absolute way, I think people are far more complex than just the gear they choose to use, but in how you prefer to experience the world and how close you want to be when you press the shutter. In my last video I talked about the 50mm as the lens for the ambiverts, not in a strict way, but as a way of describing the middle ground. Photographers who can move between observation and participation depending on the situation and how they feel. Close enough to care, but far enough to choose. There is still a personal presence in a 50mm image. You can feel the photographer in it, but it's more subtle, controlled, deliberate. The 50mm lets you be invested in a scene without being consumed by it. For me though, the 85mm feels different. I've noticed that when I reach for it, it's usually when I feel more withdrawn, more introspective, when I don't want to necessarily step into the scene, but I still want to observe it, to understand it from a distance. And that's why for me, the 85mm has always felt like a lens for the introverts. Not introverted in a limiting sense, but in the truest meaning of the word. A way of engaging with the world that begins with observation rather than participation. A preference of stillness over movement, for waiting rather than chasing. Shooting with an 85mm requires a kind of patience that not everyone is drawn to. The compression narrows the word down, the distance removes the noise, and what you're left with is a single subject, isolated from everything around it, demanding your full attention. I think that's not a technical outcome, but I really think that this is a philosophical one. The 85mm asks you to commit before you shoot, to decide before the shutter fires what the image is about. And I think that's exactly why certain photographers are so drawn to it. Not because they tend to be antisocial or withdrawn, but because they choose to think in specifics rather than everything at once. Because they are finding meaning in a single detail rather than the chaos around it. There is another kind of photographer the 85mm tends to attract as well. On one hand, we have the beginners, those who are drawn to the bokeh, the compression, and how effortlessly cinematic everything looks through the viewfinder. And there is nothing wrong with that. That's exactly where I started. But the risk is treating this lens as a shortcut, letting the blur do the storytelling without asking first whether there is actually a story worth telling. On the other hand, there is the seasoned photographers, the ones who have spent years learning how to see and have arrived at the 85mm not because of what it does automatically, but because of what it demands deliberately. Photographers like Saul Leiter, for example, who used compression and selective focus not just as effects, but as a language, a way of saying something precise about the word by choosing exactly what to leave out. And that's the real divide, not between beginners and experts, but between those who use the 85mm for what it gives them and those who use it for what it asks of them. But what is it exactly that those different focal lengths actually ask from us out in the field? If you're enjoying this kind of perspective, hit the like button and consider subscribing with a bell. Now, there is a moment on every photo walk where the theory stops and the real decisions begin. Where you're standing in a street corner, something is happening in front of you, and you only have half a second to decide whether your lens is gonna work with you or against you. And that's where a difference between a 50mm and an 85mm becomes impossible to ignore. The 50mm gives you flexibility. It sits in that middle ground where you can quickly adapt to what is happening around you. You can step a little bit closer to isolate your subject, or you can take a step back to include more context. It doesn't force you into one way of seeing, it lets you respond, and that's why it works quite well in very dynamic environments. You can follow the scene, adjust your framing, and build the image as it unfolds in front of you. The 85mm, on the other hand, is far less forgiving. It doesn't adapt to the scene, it almost forces the scene to adapt to you. Your position is fixed much further back, your field of view is quite narrow, and because of that, you don't have the freedom to adjust in small increments. If something doesn't line, you can't always fix it by moving slightly left or right. You either commit to what it is in front of you, or you let the moment go. And that changes the way you shoot dramatically. With a 50mm, you can build your frame gradually, you can explore, refine, react. With an 85mm, the process is far more decisive. You constantly ask, is this worth isolating? Is this subject strong enough to stand on its own? That's why the 85mm excels far more in situations where clarity matters far more than complexity. Portraits are the obvious examples. The compression flattens the scene just enough to bring the subject forward, while the shallow depth of field removes distractions almost entirely. The result is clean, focused, intentional, every element feels deliberate because there's so few of them. But that strength can also become a limitation. In more complex environments, crowded streets, layered scenes, moments where multiple elements interact, the 85mm can strip away too much. It can reduce a rich, dynamic situation into something overly simplified. You might get a beautiful image, but not necessarily a meaningful one. The 50mm handles those situations differently. It allows you to keep some of that complexity. Even the 50mm, it allows you some freedom to include layers in your photos, subtle interactions, and relationships between a subject and its surrounding. It doesn't isolate as aggressively, but it gives you more room to tell a fuller story. So in the field, the real difference isn't just about the compression or the bokeh. It's about how much of the world you want to keep in the frame and how much of it you're willing to let go. And that decision, more than the lens itself, is what shapes the final image. I've been shooting with the 85mm for almost 10 years and with the 50mm even longer. And if there is one thing that decade and a half has taught me is that the debate between the two lenses was never about the glass. It was never about millimeters or bokeh or compression charts. It was always about something more personal than that. It was about how you see and how close you want to be in the world when you are taking a picture. The 50mm keeps you connected. It lets you stay inside the scene, present and responsive, building the image as life unfolds around you. The 85mm pulls you back. It asks you to wait, to observe, to distill everything that is around you to the one thing that actually matters. Neither of those is the one right way to photograph the world. They're just different answers to the same question, and that answer depends on who you are, where you are in your journey, and what you want to say. So I want to ask you this question directly. Not which lens you own and which one has better specs, but which one actually reflects the way you see right now. Are you one who steps into the scene or one who observes from a distance? Are you chasing everything? Or are you leaving things out? Tell me in the comments, I'm really excited to discuss this with you. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe with the bell, or consider becoming a member to support the work behind these films. And if you want to understand the real difference between the 50 and the 35mm focal lengths, click and watch this video next. That was all for today, guys. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time, I will see you on the streets. Bye bye.